So you've decided to add a decent point-and-shoot film camera to your collection, only to realize the so-called decent point-and-shoot film cameras come at quite the premium. Well, I have an alternative for you, which is debatably just as good at a fraction of the price. Stick around. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another video. So before I actually begin speaking about the camera, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a backstory as to how I ended up onto this specific camera. So I've always felt like I needed a point and shoot film camera, mainly to just document daily life, those random moments, those simple things, that nothing so serious. So I always wanted something that was small, something that was easy to carry, and something that actually didn't even cost a lot of money, because with a camera that you're going to throw around in the bag, carry around daily, you don't want something that was actually going to be so expensive. So like taking a digital camera or taking one of your film SLRs is just sometimes not the most practical thing to do. So when I began looking for a film point and shoot camera, there were certain specs or the certain criteria that I was looking for, or certain things that the camera had to have for me to actually be convinced, or for me to actually settle on that particular camera. Point number one is I'm a frugal photographer. Basically, I like cheap equipment, and cheap necessarily not meaning poorly built or badly designed. I like a good bargain, and I needed the camera to be quite affordable because I needed to have the assurance that if the camera breaks, it's not a major loss, or if the camera stops working, because that's what happens with all these electronics that are so many years old. So I needed something that I wasn't going to spend a lot of money on. I needed something without a zoom lens, because I feel the point and shoot cameras with a prime lens seem to just have a bit better image quality, because obviously that lens is a specific focal length, so the design is just solely focused on making that lens as good as they possibly could at the time of making it. The camera had to have at least an f4 maximum aperture. I wasn't too concerned about a camera that will have f2.8 or even open wider onto that, but anything wider than f4 would have been a bonus, because I just wanted to use the camera for daily snapshots, like I take my son to the park, or we go hiking, or I just wanted something small, and f4 was a decent enough aperture. I thought it would open up. You would still not get depth of field, but you'd still have room to play with. Thirdly, the camera had to obviously take a popular kind of battery. A lot of cameras from obviously eras of yesterday or yesteryear come with all sorts of weird batteries, which are, especially in South Africa, are quite difficult to find. So I had to make sure I find a camera that takes a popular style of battery, a battery that you could easily get at a normal shop. And then lastly, I would have loved a camera that has manual ISO adjustment. Mainly, it's not a deal breaker, but mainly because I shoot and buy a lot of expired film, and most of the time you have to overexpose it, and you have to push it by a couple of stops. And the best way I find doing that is just manually adjusting your ISO, so that the camera, if you're using a light meter, is exposing obviously for the ISO that you've adjusted. It's not a deal breaker, but I would have loved a camera that has manual ISO. So after having searched for some time, I came across the Canon Prima 5. In some parts of the world it was named the Canon SureShot Max, and I got this for very cheap. It was 120 bucks or 120 rand, which in dollars is about between $5 and $8, and it's just a camera that I've grown to love, hence why I'm making this video. So let's talk about the camera itself. The camera is basically a very simple, basic camera. The top plate has got your shutter button and your film counter and your self timer button on the top. Yeah, it's got a 10 second self timer, which is default. Can't be adjusted. On the front of the camera, you've got a flash, you've got your viewfinder, and you've got a 38mm f3.5 lens. And the little on switch is on the side of the lens. When you turn this on, it opens and it retracts the lens slightly out. At the bottom of the camera, nothing except for a tripod screw. On the side of the camera, you've got the battery compartment, which takes a CR2 3-volt battery, which is fairly popular here. So that's a bonus. On the back of the camera, You've got the flash setting, which is, you've got manual on, you've got off, and you've got auto, which is also got red eye reduction. And basically that's it. It's got a little strap on it, and basically that's it. I love the camera. I love the size of it. It's not so big. It fits quite okay in the hand. It slides into the pocket quite easily, and I find that especially because of its design. It's got this boxy design, but almost very curved, and around the edges it never hooks onto pockets, so I never have a problem carrying this camera. It's got a viewfinder here, which basically only gives you a guided frame. It's not an exact frame line. You've got a light on the front of the viewfinder, which indicates it's solid green, means the camera is in focus and is ready to take a shot. If it flickers numerous times, it means the camera is not in focus, and if it flickers slowly, it means that the exposure is too dark. Turn the flash on. It's a very simple camera to operate, just a button on top, focus, autofocuses, and that's all I was looking for in a camera. But after having used this camera for about 2+ years, and I never expected much from this camera, I just wanted a simple camera, but I just grew to love this camera so much, because every time I put a roll through it and I'd get the results back, this camera was just consistently good. In terms of, it would nail focus, in terms of the contrast from the images. Obviously, the majority of image quality in film cameras is based on the film that you put through the camera, but the lens also on the camera add very strong characteristics to how your image looks. And this lens I have found to be very, very contrasty. For a point and shoot camera, this camera has really exceeded my expectations, which swiftly moves us into the image quality of this camera, which is the main reason I'm making this video, which is the main reason I would suggest this camera over anything else out there or anything similar, especially you know, your more expensive point and shoot cameras, your more premium point and shoot cameras, you know, like your Olympus, MJU. Look, if you have the money to buy one of those cameras, you are more than welcome to buy those cameras. They are brilliant cameras, but I will always think something like this is a better alternative, mainly because the image quality is up there, and I'll put a couple of images on the screen throughout the entire video, but the images that come out of this camera are ridiculously sharp. They were sharp beyond what I ever exceeded. I first bought this camera and I was just taking random shots, you know, especially with my son, daily life, normal stuff. Carry the camera around, keep the camera in the cubbyhole of the car, drive whenever I'm driving, and I always knew I had a camera with some film in it. But every time I got the images back from the lab, I just was so impressed. One, the contrast on the images, the sharpness on the images, and how consistent for a point and shoot this camera was when it came to focusing. It doesn't have focus points, or it just has a little middle cross in the viewfinder. You align that with your subject and you shoot and hope for the best. But every time I got the images back here, the amount of images that were in focus were just utterly amazing. It was just blowing my mind away all the time, up to a point where I actually was so impressed with this camera, I started bringing it with on my normal paid shoots or on normal client commercial work, and I would do film outtakes, which is something I've always done when I do a shoot and I'm shooting digital. I always have a film camera in the kit, not specifically for the client work, but for me to just take film outtakes. It's something that I've always incorporated in my workflow. It's something that I've always liked doing. So I started using this for taking film outtakes, and I remember the one shoot I did for a client where they were doing all these bridal gowns, and it was a very nice lifestyle shoot. I thought, let me take a couple of shots with this camera just to see how it would actually perform with portraits, you know, especially for the depth of field. I know the lens is not a wide or a lens that opens up its aperture quite wide, f3.5, but f3.5 is still, you know, still quite good. And I took some portraits from that shoot, and when I got the film back, I was mesmerized. I was truly blown away, to the point that I thought, you know what, you could actually get away on doing an entire portrait shoot with this camera and get some very, very good results, especially if you understand light, if you understand the inner workings of this camera, its strong points and ways to dummy the camera to use its widest aperture, because you obviously can't control any of those settings on here. But it impressed me so much that it was literally the camera I grabbed for about a year and a half. This was my daily camera on my Instagram for an entire probably year. The only film images I was sharing on there were shot with this camera, because it was just the only camera I used. Because of its size and the results I kept on getting, I was just by default going straight for this camera all the time. Every time I needed to go out and needed to take a camera with me, I would either take my digital camera with me plus this, because I was just absolutely enjoying, being able to just put this thing to your face, take a shot, and the results were just absolutely amazing. So every camera obviously has got its drawbacks, and no camera is flawless and perfect. This camera does have a few drawbacks, or a few, not drawbacks, but things I wish were better, but over time I've learned to live with them. They don't really bother me. It's just mainly maybe it would be things that would be nice to have. For starters, when you turn the camera on, it does make this loud noise. So if, for instance, you're trying to be discreet, it obviously will draw attention. I'll turn it on now. So I'll turn it on just now so you can hear. So that's the noise it'll make when you turn it on, and it pushes the lens out. And every time you fire a shot, I don't have any film loaded onto here, but every time you fire a shot, when it winds to the next frame, it is a bit loud. So if you're trying to do street and be discreet, maybe it is a bit of a loud camera. And the other thing not a drawback, or the other thing is the viewfinder, the framing, I always find is just a little bit out. So if you're very precise on your framing, even though it does have frame lines in there which are not very clear, you have to really look into the viewfinder and make out the suggested frame line inside the camera. It's not obviously precise and 100% accurate. So if you are precisely framing, you might just miss things, or you might just get something out of the frame. And then the other thing that I wish this camera actually had, if it had this, then it would ideally be the ultimate camera for me, I just wish this camera had a manual ISO adjustment. It's got a DX reading, so when you put film in, it'll read the film using the contacts on the film. You can obviously modify it by taping over certain contacts on the film canister. There's tons of articles on the internet on how to do that, but I wish this camera had manual ISO adjustment. If it had that, it would for me be the ultimate film camera. I just felt I needed to make this video so I could share this camera and what it is capable with you guys, especially for somebody who's looking to get themselves a decent point and shoot film camera. It's not a hard to find camera, but it's also not a very easy to find camera. There is quite a few of them on eBay. They don't obviously have the hype points of your Yashica T4s and your Yashica T3s and your Olympus Stylus and your MJUs and all of that, but honestly speaking, the results I've gotten for this camera, and the results I've compared to those other cameras, I don't see any gripes with this camera. And obviously it won't give you the hype points that MJU or Yashica T4 will give you amongst your film shooters. But if you're basically looking for a very good camera, looking for a camera that will take very good images, easy to use, and literally not expensive. If this thing breaks, I'm not gonna cry over spilt milk because I haven't invested a ton load of money on this. Look, just to put it into perspective as well, this camera at the time of making this video, with the price of an MJU, eBay price of an MJU and the eBay price of this, you can buy 10 of these with the price you can buy one MJU. So if this thing does break, it's not the end of the world. But look, if your MJU or your Yashica T4 does break, it's a very, very, very costly thing. And I'm not making this video to downplay all the premium and trendy point and shoots, but it's just I felt I needed to make a video about this camera because I've really enjoyed using this camera. It has pretty much been my go-to camera for the last 2 or 3 years. It's the most fun I've had with a camera in a long time. As much as I enjoy my SLRs, my medium format cameras, my digital cameras, but this camera has literally been the one camera every time I pick it up. I have so much fun shooting it, mainly because I just never seem to expect much from it, even after using it for such a long time. And every time I get the results back, they are just absolutely stunning. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.